Hi everybody. So we are here to speak about sustainability for games, and we expect to give you a quick overview of what the situation is all across the world. We are lucky to have international speakers here today, so this conference, this panel will be held in English. So I apologize in advance for my sexy French accent. And I also want to apologize for the fact that, as you can see here, we are 4 white males, so it's an obvious lack of diversity. When we met all together before, in order to work on the content of this panel, we realized that, and it was a bit too short to change anything to this. So once again, we apologize, and we expect the diversity will come from the audience. As a quick introduction regarding the topic, let me remind you what the situation is. So we are, as you know, one very significant industry, the very first one in the entertainment field. We're speaking about a market of close to $2 billion a year. And obviously, it brings a significant impact in terms of environment. So not only because of all the devices that we are using, the mobile phone, the console, and the PCs, but also all the devices that we don't see, from the network, the cables, the servers, and so on. Which means that if we look at the game's life cycle, it's not only the way we design and develop games, it's also all the sides. And we are not speaking only about carbon emissions, but also about resources consumptions, like all the raw materials, but also some basic ones like waters, and of course with computers pollutions. So the way we have organized this panel will cover three different parts. The first one, we would like to discuss about the regulation, not only in Europe, but globally. The way we also can make a difference and understand the issues, and also measure our own footprint, so calculation. And then have a quick overview of all the initiatives that the industry has already performed or is about to perform in order to reduce this footprint. So let me introduce the speakers here. We have Sam Barratt. So Sam, you're Chief of Youth, Education and Advocacy at the United Nations Environment Program, and you're also co-founder of Playing for the Planet Alliance. Manuel, you're what? You're from Video Game Europe, and you're in charge of many topics, including sustainability. And Geoffrey, you're the French in the room with me, and you're engineer, and you're the famous face of JYROS today, and you handle all the sustainability projects within Game Only. So let's speak about regulation, and to start with this, well, maybe we can start by a quick questions to the audience in order for us to know what brings you here. So is there in the audience anybody who is actively working on sustainability for games in the room? Can you raise up your hand? And is there anybody who expects to do so in the few weeks or months? Okay. So everybody else, this is just because you have seen light, or? Okay, thanks. So Manuel, as a first question, can you maybe just draw us quickly what is the situation in Europe regarding regulations and how your members are seeing it? Is it seen as a constraint, or are an opportunity? And is it exactly the same within all the countries in Europe, all your members?
Thank you, Pierre. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Manuel Mendes from Video Games Europe. Just very quickly, Video Games Europe is a trade association. We have members all across Europe, both at national trade association levels, from Portugal to Poland, from Serbia to the UK. And we also have as members a few of the big names in the sector, from Nintendo to Activision, Square Enix, you name it. The big ones are generally our members. So regarding the regulation, Pierre, could you move on to the other slide, please? So the next one? Yeah. So recently, you might have heard in the news with the EU Green Deal, there is a series of new relevant environmental legislation. These are the 6 that I picked out that would be more directly relevant for the video game sector. I don't think you want to hear me talk about wastewater treatment regulation. I don't think it's really relevant. But one of the first ones to be adopted was empowering consumers in green transition. This is basically requiring business operators to inform consumers about the greenness of their commercial choices. Then we have the 2 most relevant ones, in my view, which are the Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Bit of a mouthful, that one. We could just call it CS3D for a shorthand. Then we also have the Right to Repair Directive, which impacts the games more on the console aspect of things. The Eco Design Regulation, which pertains to all products. This is more relevant for the clothes sector, but also has some relevance for the design of video game consoles. And then there's also pending, this is the Green Claims Directive. This is basically to fight greenwashing. It's still being discussed at a political level. It was substantially delayed. But so going back to the, next slide, please. So the CSRD, or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, it is basically a directive that requires large businesses to report on the impact of the environmental impact of their operations. This was already covered to a certain extent by the non-financial reporting directive, so things that companies were obliged to report on that did not have a financial nature. This was substantially expanded with the CSRD, not only in the scope of what has to be reported, but also the types of companies that have to report. This will generally apply only to larger companies. You can see here it's 250 employees or more, or at least 25 million in assets. So SMEs will only marginally be covered by this, at least to begin with. Noteworthy is that the first year of reporting that is required is next year. So next year is the first year that this directive will fully come into effect. So in practice, what you have to report, this adopts the double materiality criteria, and I will not get into technicalities too much because I don't want to bore you. But essentially what changed is not only you have to report what is materially impactful, but also financially impactful. What does this mean? Materially impactful is something that has an impact on the environment or society at large, and negative one. And financial is what reflects on the balance sheet of a company, their profitability, their expenses, etc. If the thing that you are analyzing meets one of these 2 criteria, you are legally required to report this. The non-compliance with this legislation will entail fines. Since it's a directive, this will vary a little bit from country to country, but it can go from even prison time in Ireland to blocking of access to European funding and fines. So it's varied, but it does have a bit of teeth. And the CS3D, which was very recently approved, still not in force, will the general idea of this directive is to bake into corporate decision-making to basically force company executives to consider environmental aspects and also sustainability regard to human rights into their decision-making process and their deal-making, etc. It contains a series of obligations, and the difficulty with this one, talking in abstract, is that the practical impact of this legislation will vary in each case based on what your company does. If you're a steel-making company, it will have different obligations than if you make video games. So yeah, this is it's quite a big directive, I must say. This one is almost 200 pages long. Makes me cry sometimes, but it is an important piece of legislation because it's one of the first pieces of legislation I've seen that tries to steer corporate decision-making into a sustainable path, which is, I believe, generally welcome. But I don't want to bore you very much more with this. But these are the main ones. Then you also have the right to repair directive, which is basically what it says. Consumers should have this directive should facilitate access to repairing services and spare parts. And eco-design, it will apply to e-products and video game consoles to a certain extent. But yeah, these are the quick points. I don't want to bore you more, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Is there, Geoffrey, is there any specificities in France? I'm thinking especially regarding the subsidy system, for instance.
Yes, well, as you will probably hear after this conference, so you can stay here and stay in this room. The CNC is going to put in place some eco-conditionality to their fundings. So again, you'll know more about that at the next conference, but basically for some of the FAJV fundings, you will need to supply a carbon footprint assessment, preliminary carbon footprint assessment of your project. So yeah, that's something that's already in place for cinema and TV, but it's coming for video games as well, which is one of the reasons why we've developed JYROS, but I'll come back on this later. But yeah, that's the main one, and obviously all the everything that Manuel just talked about is going to be transferred to the French laws as well. So it's all coming. But yeah, the main one is this CNC eco-conditionality. But we know also that even out with this, there's we know that regions as well are starting to look into this for funding and things like that. I think Pierre, you're in the southwest, and I think the region in Bordeaux is quite keen on those subjects, and is starting to ask companies to provide carbon footprints.
Absolutely.
And same, I think in Rhône-Alpes as well, it's starting to be. I've heard a few. But a few studios who have been asked, but yeah, it's coming, in different stages in different regions in France. But yeah, it's starting to come to this as well. So it's best to be prepared, I guess.
Yeah. So change is coming, and Sam, as you have a more global view with Playing for the Planet and the United Nations, is the level of pressure the same all across the world, or is it really specific to Europe?
So, what I would say, I was in Shenzhen and Shanghai just a couple of weeks ago with NetEase and Tencent talking about the Chinese context. And I think it's much more voluntary there, but there's a lot of work being done by some very big Chinese parts of the games industry that's really encouraging, that's voluntary to start with, that I think will then move to be much more regulatory. I think in the United States, I think there are some good things happening with some of the bigger studios. But I think voluntary leadership often isn't enough. I think regulatory enforcement creates a level playing field, which everyone has to kind of oblige and comply to. So I do think what's happening in the European Union is very positive. Some people might not agree with me, but I think everyone needs to have the same rules of the game, because what we're trying to do right now is cut emissions by 50% by 2030. And regulation is critical if we're going to meet that goal. And so while CSRD may have many imperfections, I think it's a driver. And it's also being noticed by other parts of the world as well. Because if Europe has a different framework to other parts of the globe, then other parts of the globe will have to think about how they lean in against that as well, given that Europe is such a big part of the market. So I think what we're seeing in Europe is from my perspective, very positive. But I would say what we're trying to do is create a benign environment where people are measuring their carbon footprint, starting to take action on it. But I think this is all around systems and the interdependencies the games industry have with wider technology systems, and to see what they can do to make the greatest difference. So we'll move into that in the later part of the discussion. But I would say from a UN perspective, just the work that JYROS has done, I think is just brilliant. I think the work we're seeing in France with CNC, maybe not everyone agrees in the room, but I think is really positive. Because really, you can't play games on a dead planet, and we don't really have an alternative unless you have this kind of Muskian free pass. So we do need to do all we can to retain the viability of kind of everything we've taken for granted on this earth, and that does mean rapid decarbonisation, which means that all levers that we have in our power need to be pulled.
That's okay. So let's switch to the calculation part. Maybe a question for you, Manuel. How the video games companies are organized today to report, in fact, their obligations regarding this regulation?
You mean the CSRD? Yeah. A lot of our members are now producing sustainability reports, even if short ones. But as Sam said, it starts with a voluntary, which is good, but not good enough yet, hence the need for regulation. I coordinate a working group within Video Games Europe, specifically related to this, and I can tell you that there is significant interest. In the last meeting we had, was last month, and I actually got too many questions from our members, which is not an unusual issue, because there was real appetite to know more, and they really want to understand more, which is a good sign, I would say. It doesn't happen that often that you get such appetite to learn more. So it shows that at least a great deal of our members are engaged in trying to comply with these points to the greatest possible extent that they can. But indeed, yeah, if it answers your question.
Thanks. So Sam, you as Playing for the Planet, you published a report recently about the importance of calculating scope 3, embedding scope 3 in the calculations. So maybe you can let us know a bit more regarding this topic.
Yeah, so we spent probably 12 months just trying to get consensus between hardware and software around where does the boundary on scope 3 stop and where does it start, and when is it the hardware liability and where is the game producer's liability. And I think that was a really useful way of generating consensus, particularly from a software manufacturer's perspective, around the hardware manufacturer kind of owns the bulk of the liability. However, if you are producing games that have a heavy spec in terms of what you're delivering, then you do have responsibility to try and think about how you can kind of shrink some of the intensity of that game that you're making. So that paper, I think, was useful to build alignment around that. Then from that, we've created a calculator that will be a public good from next year, which we're testing, that will allow people to then measure their carbon footprint, particularly on scope 3, around category 1 and 11, which is the hot spot of where probably 80 to 90% of all emissions are. So for the games industry, it really, I mean, it might take you, say, 3 to 4 hours to get all the data in to measure your carbon footprint. But really, we think this is just an act of compliance. We don't think it should be terribly hard, But what we're trying to do is to get this to be a normative thing that everybody does, a standard business practice. And also what JYROS have done with their calculator and also Neo Games in Finland, I think is really positive. So we've spent time with the Carbon Trust to align it to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which we think is the kind of the place where you kind of organise your emissions against. But the GHG protocol is not straightforward for games, so we've interpreted that so it makes sense for the games industry, so people can then make clear judgments about what they need to do, where and why. So what we're looking to do for Playing for the Planet is to provide a public good of a calculator. Geoffrey and I are going to talk about their methodology and ours over lunch and just to look at the similarities and the differences. But we think tools are a means to an end, not an end in itself. What matters is the action you take afterwards. So I think there can be some like calculator obsession, which is like you open your toolbox and you just pull out this calculator as the only tool there. But really it's the action that you take that matters. And so what we think is important is building a culture within a studio where the CFO will say yes, not no. The CEO will give space and time for this to be important. And the sustainability leadership is shared amongst many rather than owned by the few. So really carbon calculation is just the first step. And it's an important one because if you don't measure it, then you can't act. But really the next step is what we want to put a lot more time into, which is building the leadership competencies and the engagement and the tooling for people to then follow off the back of that calculation once it's made. So is it the best calculator in the world? Probably not. Could it be better? Probably. But is it a good start? For sure. But really, tools are just a means to an end, not an end in itself. But I think what JYROS have done to start with is really, really, really impressive. And so I think what's happened in France has been an area that we've been inspired by that led us to take some of the steps that we've done here as well. So, yeah.
Okay, so maybe Geoffrey, you can explain the philosophy behind JYROS and why we have set up this calculator and how it can help companies.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sam, for the praise. It's always nice. Yeah, so the reason why we created JYROS was, well, obviously there was this CNC obligation coming, so there was a need to create a tool for video games industry. There's some tools that have been developed for cinema and TV, but yeah, there was an obligation for us to create a tool. But we wanted to go beyond what CNC was asking of us, because basically the CNC footprint that you will need to calculate will be only on the project side, but we wanted really to cover the whole perimeter of emissions, going all the way to what Sam called scope 3, use of sold product, which is basically the impact of your games when they're played. As Sam was saying, that's something that's a huge impact, obviously, and the choices you make in games design have an impact on the electric consumption of the consoles or the PCs or the smartphones. So you own some of the responsibility. We wanted also a tool that would be easy to use and accessible, because we know that in France, most of the video games companies are very small companies or smallish companies. So, and that most of those companies don't have anyone dedicated to those calculations, to CSR, etc. So we wanted something that could be used by pretty much anyone. So how did we do that? Basically, first, we went looking for a partner to create the tool for us, but same as what Playing for the Planet have done, because we are not experts in carbon footprint assessment or environmental assessment. So we came up with a partnership with iCare, they're a company specialized in all those topics, carbon footprint calculation and life cycle assessments, etc. So they are the experts. They can they did the tool for us, and then we partnered them with some pilot companies. So we went looking for companies representative of the video game industry in France. So in the end, we had 27 companies, ranging from very small companies. We have a studio that's it's 2.5 people, so it's a small studio in Bordeaux called Novabox, all the way up to Amplitude in Paris. So much bigger studio. We have studios from all over France. We have studios that do PC games, console games, smartphone games, cloud gaming, VR, etc. So we really wanted to cover the whole scope. So what those studios did basically is that they reviewed the methodology to make sure that what we were putting in the tool made sense with regards to their work, their day-to-day work, and also they were basically the guinea pigs. So they played with JYROS, they tested it, they used it, they made comments so that basically anyone could take JYROS and start using it without, wondering, okay, I have no idea what they're asking me to connect here. So we wanted to make sure that people knew exactly what was expecting of them. So there's lots of informations and things to make it as easy as possible for people to fill in the forms in JYROS. And that was the whole point. And apparently from the comments I've been gathering over the few months, because JYROS has been out since October, it seems that this goal has been achieved, because most people say, the first thing they tell me is, oh wow, it was much easier than what I thought. So we're quite happy with that. And obviously, I'm on this, I think exactly the same as Sam. JYROS at the moment is a calculator, so you put your data, you get the results, you see the spread of your emissions, and you can target where you can act. But we want people then to act. So fill in the forms, and then, okay, you can see the spread of your emissions, and you can start thinking, okay, what can I do to reduce that? And we are hoping as well to continue developing JYROS to make it more like of a platform that will help you to do that, give you tips. We're working on a best practice guide at the moment, which we're hoping to have a first version out by the end of next week, hopefully. And then we want to, again, develop the JYROS into a platform that will then give you access to people, resources, etc., so that once you've done your calculation, you know where to go from there. And we've created a great Discord as well, where you can join us and exchange good practice and things like that. So don't hesitate.
Thank you. So we spoke about JYROS as a calculator. The one playing for the planet is expected to release. Is there any other opportunities like this? Any other calculator which may comes from Europe, for instance, or anywhere else in the world?
At this stage, I don't think there is a plan for the European Commission to have a dedicated calculator specifically for the video game sector. I think they will likely wait and see how these experiments go, but they're definitely interested to see how these impacts can be mitigated. I had a very quick look at the JYROS, and it looks very interesting. It's very appealing because it's from what I saw, it looks fairly easy to use. It's Excel-based, which is a type of work setting that most people are somewhat familiar with. And from what I saw, the results were generally aligned with what the operators expected. Of course, it's not perfect, because it will never be perfect. But there are, for example, issues regarding the variety of devices. For example, for consoles, it's easier to predict the average power use per consumer. But if you go, for example, for custom-made PCs or smartphones, which have hundreds of models, calculating averages on this becomes a bit more difficult in practice, becomes a bit nitty-gritty. So at some point, maybe if it's possible to achieve an average baseline, you're the expert on this, Geoffrey. I wouldn't want to cut across, but this is a point that, while it's working, it seems to work well now, it will require further tailoring on this. But I don't know, what do you think?
On this typical point, in fact, what JYROS is doing, we focus on the impact of the key component of the machine and not on the machine itself, because quite complicated to have a clear estimate of the impact for machine. But what we can find in some database like NegaOctet, for instance, are impact factors based on a CPU, based on the level of engraving, for instance, or the size of the chip. So yeah, thanks to this, it's possible to have a kind of granularity which goes through each machine, but also each game, because games are linked to minimum specifications, which helps in such calculations. So that's the approach that JYROS has taken. So yeah, let's focus on activation, and we can have here some examples of the initiatives that the industry has taken. So as you can see here, this is divided in two parts. One is based on the fact that we are part of an entertainment industry, and we are supposed through the narrative and the gameplay or whatever, the graphics also, we are supposed to inspire change. So there are a large level of initiatives regarding this. So maybe we can focus on that first. I let you choose the one you want to promote and put in front. So maybe Sam first. Maybe not first because you have slides after. Yeah, sure. So maybe you, Geoffrey.
Yeah, but to stay on the French side of things, there's a very good one, which I don't know if you went to Marianne Tostivin conference yesterday. She talked about it, but it's called Screens of Tomorrow, l'écran d'après, which basically it's a great initiative where it's a tool for studios to self-assess basically the content of their games. So basically you look, it's a series of questions that makes you think about the content of your game. So it's not only about sustainability, but it's also about diversity, everything that can be in games. The good thing is that it's not. It doesn't tell you need to put this and this and this in your game. It's really, a series of questions where you can think about what you have in your game and okay, maybe I might want to change that or that. It doesn't tell you need to address everything in one go because it's complete nonsense and you can't address everything. But yeah, it makes you just think about the content of your games and things you might want to change and to again push potential change in people's behavior, people's thinking, and the way they see things, etc. And it starts obviously with asking yourself how you represent things and how you could induce this change through this. So it's quite a great tool. So I would recommend it. It's free as well. So don't hesitate to have a look.
Yeah, I think the guide is available online, also in English version. So you just have to type "Screen of Tomorrow" or "L'écran d'après" in French. Yeah, a good example of what you just depict, in fact, is the way some STR games have changed in the way you could, for instance, cut wood to generate some buildings and things like this. The very first games like this was based on infinite resources, and now, including into the gameplay, you have the challenge of taking care of the resource because it's grow up quite slowly, and so if you keep all the wood from the very beginning of the game, then it's quickly game over. So that's interesting to see how gameplay can evolve, taking that into consideration. Sam, is there any initiative, or when we prepared the panel, you were speaking about games that you wanted to use as an example of good things? So I don't know. Oh, sorry, Manuel.
No, I'm happy to take on this one. No, you mentioned finite resource in the game. It reminds me of one of my first games experiences was Age of Empires. If you remember, at some point, if you go long enough in a match, you will run out of resources. unless you get gold from the relics, which is like magic. But I remember clearly in many games, the long ones, that the map would just be empty, and it would just be you could see the emptiness of it, and like you could see the place where the trees were, and it's a bit harrowing a little bit to look at everything. But in my mind, I had this example. Has anyone here played Grand Theft Auto 5? Show of hands, please. Do you listen with attention to the radio ads?
I spent my game entirely on the radio.
Exactly. In the radio ads, there in GTA 5 particularly, in the other ones as well, there's a couple of ads that really struck me and make me laugh and think at the same time. I really like the one where they advertise. It's called Bravado, which is making fun of General Motors or Ford or whatever, where they say the American dream is a gas-guzzling giant that goes fast and gets you vapid pussy. Sorry for the word, but this is verbatim. And this kind of criticism, satire in the game, I personally find it very compelling, and it makes one think a little bit. This is just a very deep satirical and maybe a bit childish example, but I do think that through satire and parody, you can definitely raise awareness and, if anything, get people to think about things, which is a start. I mean, we can't expect a game to turn a person into an eco-warrior, nor we want, but we can certainly make them think, and that is something already. But this is just one of many examples that one could give.
So Sam, your turn.
I could say many things. I mean, I do think what Arnaud Fayal has done on his in his diagnostic to work out how your game can make a difference down at Ubisoft is fantastic. So he's a very deep thinker around how games can make a difference through different integrations. I think the Xbox Sustainability Toolkit is brilliant. And they have been working with Epic to just changing the fidelity and the graphic intensity of the menu, which took the equivalent of 100 million cars off the road just by dropping down some of the power in a place that you didn't really need it. So I think there's now a calibration in how games are being offered that's reducing the carbon intensity. So you then don't have to offset carbon at the end of the day. So the higher upstream we go, working with platforms, working with engines, to make it easier for those to make games, not to then have to think about what they need to do to deal with the carbon consequence of play, makes a hell of a difference. So for me, I do think Unreal and Unity, particularly with the engines, could do so much more to make a difference on this. And I do think platforms are doing a good job, but again, could do a lot more to support those that build the games to reduce the carbon intensity of play. But I had a couple of slides to show briefly, which is, we've set ourselves a challenge, which is, I think there's two ways to think about the climate crisis we face. One is just to be completely paralyzed, like, who am I to make a difference? I feel utterly overwhelmed, and nothing I do matters. And so you're like, it's quite heavy. And I think that mindset, I think, is probably one of the greatest risks that we face, which is like, we can't have agency, we can't make a difference. And so I think what we're trying to do is to get people to think about having stories that show there is an opportunity to have agency and an opportunity to have action, because knowledge isn't what we're missing. I think it's agency is the gap that we have. And so what we've set ourselves the challenge with Playing for the Planet for the Green Game Jam is to see how we can create small actions to kind of grow them into a bigger movement. So just on the next slide, people learn by doing. I think, hands up if that applies to you. I know it applies to my kids. If I get them to do something that they do, rather than just reading something, they're more likely to do it. And if other people do it, it gets reinforced. And then if there's a group-based approach, then it then grows and becomes socialized. So the theory that we have on the Green Game Jam is start small and grow, do it, learn from others, and then do it with others, so then it can kind of grow further. So the next slide is just to show last year a few examples on food with Heyday. just some different approaches. Like there was a cookbook with different recipes, some regenerative farming, some pop-up ads that came through that's quite cool. On transformers, there's a whole amount of work that went in there around how people could actually transfer their energy supply that we put into the game with regen, which was good. And then again, lighter, but with I think that was Talking Tom too. I think we did a few different things there with them around bringing different themes into the games. And so what we have this year is 80 studios looking to get 1 million people take action in the real world. And I think we're on track to do it. And there's some remarkable ideas, even from games like PUBG, which I'm like, I don't think this is for you. And they're like, no, this is really for us. And we've done a lot of polling and research around this. We're working with some academics from a few different universities with 5 different games to work out what is the tolerance of players to do different things. How do you communicate in a way with them that has resonance? And how do you track and follow the difference you can make through games? So the reason that Playing for the Planet exists is because decarbonisation is a goal, but the activation opportunity within this cultural medium, I think, is truly phenomenal. But I think we don't want to tell game makers what to do. We want to give them the tools and the insight for them to deploy that through the art that they make with the community that they know to see what's appropriate for what they're trying to do. So just on the last slide, I think I've got something here, which is maybe just back over to you, which is, I feel like the UN doesn't really work with any sectors like this with the intensity that we have for Playing for the Planet. But we do it because we think this industry is special and we think this industry can make a difference. And we've done some research that says we think gamers can really engage in this theme. So what I wanted just to say on this is I think green activations in games, whether it's radio ads, which may or may not be appropriate, there's so many things you can do if you choose to. And it's just opening up that choice architecture in every game, because I think every game can make a difference if it wants to. So that's our hypothesis that we're testing. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you very much. So we wanted to have a slide here in order to share what could be a relevant approach and a very progressive approach if this is just the beginning for you to start to be active on the topic, taking into consideration the pressure which is now coming from the regulation. I think that it's not only for large company today that they have to focus on this, and everybody should be prepared to start collecting data in order to generate what we call a non-financial report, even if it's not deeply into the details, starting by having the reflex to collect this data each time you can inside the company makes really sense in order to start with basic GHG or bilan carbon approach. And then it's easier to activate what I call easy move, which are very frequently a synonym of savings, because of course if you manage properly your transportation plans or your energy consumption with your offices, or the way you buy PCs and things like this, of course you will directly goes to significant saving. Maybe not a significant reduction of your footprint, but saving, and I think that's a very first start. And then this is very important to focus on what Sam told us before, that 80 to 90% of your footprint will be based on the use of the product that you are developing. So that means that you also have to enter into an analysis of this product, and here this is quite simple. If we summarize what matters, we are speaking about the size of your game. We are speaking about which kind of hardware is dedicated to your game, and we are speaking about what will be the energy consumption of the couple your game on this kind of hardware. And this is what will generate 80 to 90, even more % of your impact at the end. So, yeah, I think this is something very pragmatic in terms of approach when you start from nothing to a quite significant level of detail. So we only have 5 minutes now for questions, so maybe 10 minutes for questions. So I think we can stop here with this slide, and we are happy to welcome your questions, if any.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and for a very good overview. Thank you. So I'm Jessica. I'm a consultant in political communication and in advocacy. And I have a question for Sam. I hope you will excuse my question, which is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's my Scouse sense of humor, so I'm sure you'll understand. I've noticed that for the 2024 results, you're planning on having measurable targets in the report, and it wasn't as such beforehand. Was it very difficult to convince the members that it was necessary, it was a necessary step to go forward and to measure really the targets?
When you say measurable, do you mean having consistency around what people are reporting into
Yes.
Planning? Mm-hmm. So I think we've thought long and hard about this because we feel like many members are already part of SBTI, the Science-Based Target Initiative. They're already part of other reporting requirements. They're also going to be reporting on CSRD. We think that our role is to get commonality in the reporting and to get people not to have yet another thing to report to, but to share their reporting outcomes with us and to baseline in the same way. Because there are some apples and there are some pears in there, and it's not always easy to see what's what. What we've also been thinking about is to work out what does leadership look like on this agenda versus what does collaboration look like and what does emerging leadership look like. And on Playing for the Planet, we've created a spectrum where we don't judge you for where you begin, we judge you for the progress that you make. And each year we want to ratchet up those commitments so people can get more progressives as they go forward. There's a lot of imperfect leadership in this. And I think if you look at it, you go, that's not really good enough. And so we have that conversation pretty much every week, which is we would like you to go further. But the political dynamic in a studio is I have a problem with somebody that isn't giving me the support to do this, or I can't win the buy-in to do that. So for us, it's more about what is the political dynamic within a studio that creates efficacy for those individuals to be successful. Because I'm not CEO of any one of these studios, but all we can offer is tools, engagement, a peer group, and kind of clarity. And so Playing for the Planet, I think, is a movement of like-minded individuals in studios that either want to push their studio to go further or create exemplar leadership that others can then respond to. So it's kind of this collaborative, competitive dynamic where we're trying to get people to do things that are different. So for the annual impact report for this year, what we want to do is be a lot more deterministic around what does leadership mean, but also be clear we are an altar not for people's decarbonisation commitments to be judged, because that needs to go to other locations, but to be a place where leadership and collaboration is kind of worked through. So it's slightly different to some extent, because I don't think our role is to be a regulator, because that's certainly not the spirit that we're coming at this with, but is to generate leadership and opportunity. I think that's how we're coming at it.
Hi, Maxime Baudin. I'm working as a game designer at Focus, but also working with the IGDA Climate SIG, so specifically with Arnaud Fayol. We are building a best practice database on how to do green game design in general, and we are having this problem with communicating about the website, the tools that are like community. How do you say it? Community-built tools are difficult to communicate around. So is there any ways, any good communication channels to talk about these tools around through other studios?
Is that to me?
Anyone.
I mean, I would say Playing for the Planet is a collaborative space, and we're happy to share anything that we think has value and merit for others. I think IGDA Climate SIG we do a lot with, and they do some phenomenal work, and I'm a big fan of everyone that works there. But I feel a little bit like, from my side, the more we can learn together and take walls down so we can be supportive of a movement, the more impact and change we will have. So if there's anything we can do to help, then just ask. We're very non-intimidating. But I also think in the French games industry, there's something quite special here that you can almost kind of feel it in your fingers, of people that do have a sensibility that's quite different. They do have a compassion and a connection to ecology that's quite rare. And so I do think something within the French games community, whenever I've come across it, I walk away thinking the French are often very pessimistic about many things, which I always find beguiling. But you should be very optimistic around like what is within this sector, because I think it's quite special. That probably doesn't help you at all, but we're here to be helpful. But just be proud of kind of some of the things and the sentiment that you bring.
Okay, so asked to Playing for the Planet to communicate about the tool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, on a French level, we're happy to communicate about it on JYROS as well. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line or come to my stand over there.
Yeah, if you look at the way that Screen of Tomorrow, which has been mentioned earlier, has been promoted not only by SNGV, but also all the cluster at the regional level. Of course, it will be very easy to take action with JYROS, SNGV, and all the clusters. No problem.
Hello. Thanks for the presentation. My question is, how long does it take for regulation to come into effect from the idea to the real effect in the industry? Because as a French, I'm very pessimistic about it being coming at time soon enough.
So this one is for me, I think. No, I mean, it will depend what type of regulation you're talking about. If you're talking about a European directive, from the moment it's proposed until it actually comes into effect, it can take 3-4 years at the earliest. Usually, it depends really on the topics. In this case, the CSRD, it was proposed in 2021, I believe. It was voted in 23. It was finished in 23, and it will come into effect in 25. So 4 years. That's the timeline. Now, when you mean by taking effect, you mean companies complying, or?
Yes.
Well, then you'll have, in general, it should be, in this case, starting in 2025. But if you talk about the material impact of this reporting, that's a question I cannot answer. It involves futurology that I cannot do. But yeah, and as Sam was saying, regulation is essential to ensure that this is taken seriously going forward. And the CSRD, the CS-triple-D, sorry, it's a lot of acronyms, will indeed, in my opinion, make a difference going forward, because there is now specific obligations to take into account in your decision-making process, these environments. And if there's something that I know companies don't like to be fined or sued, it's cheaper for them to comply. So there's also an incentive, the serious incentive to comply with this kind of regulation. So yeah, I didn't answer your question in full. I'm sorry, but
no, it's okay. Thanks.
No, but it's a very complex question. I think it's quite impossible to answer it easily, because of course it's not quick enough, for sure. But what we also have to understand, regulation is mandatory to achieve that goal. And what we can see here is that we have now obligations for many companies, the biggest one. They are also liable, or they are becoming liable on what they are doing for as a future impact. So the pressure is here, but the results obviously are not. Yeah. not yet.
Not yet, but like these initiatives from JYROS and Playing for the Planet, specifically the calculator is definitely going to be a tool for companies to help them in compliance with this legislation. There will definitely be tools that can make compliance easier, or at least understand what is necessary to comply. So these initiatives are all extremely welcomed.
Yeah, and it's a good example because here you can see that because of the regulation, this kind of tool has been set up very quickly, thanks also with the support of the state. So you can see very fast achievement here, but now it's just one piece of the global puzzle. So once again, to answer your question, it's not quick enough yet.
Hi, Pascal Le Guignot from Asobo Studio. I have a question about the carbon impact and how you measure the remote work in the industry. I don't know if you have numbers to share with us. So maybe I have the idea that the more you work remotely, the more you can save energy. But maybe it's not true, or maybe you have I don't know. If you have numbers to share, I would like
well, I can take this one because I've been looking at it for the good practice guide. I don't really have numbers in mind, but from what I've seen from ADEME, which is the French environment agency, basically, yeah, it has an impact, but you need to be careful about it. So basically, if you're remote working like half a day, then you lose obviously you lose the impact because the person still has to travel to work. But yeah, if you do a full day, it obviously decreases the impact of transportation, and well, the person still has to consume some electricity, but it reduces the balance is in favor of remote working. And I think from what Adem was saying as well, the best way to go about it, the very best way, if you want, is actually to have a full day of remote working for everyone, because then the office is closed, you don't using any energy in the office, so you actually save a lot of energy compared to having just several people, because you still need to, even if you have only a part of the studio, obviously you still need the lights and stuff on site. Obviously, it's not always easy to put that in practice, but apparently that's the way you can get the biggest saving.
I think it was more on the transportation, I was thinking, because most of the time the PCs are remote too, are inside the company, so you're still using the same amount of electricity, maybe twice of it, but because you have your own computer at home.
Yeah.
But well, we are living in big cities most of the time, and with a lot of pollution from the engines, and the public transportation are when they are working well, they are saturated. So I was more thinking about the energy you save when you transport just electrons compared to 80 kilograms of human bodies.
Yeah, I guess if there's an issue, if you're remote working actually on a remote machine, that's it's a bit more complicated, obviously, because you have twice the number of machines as well. So it's,
and sorry, and I forgot the name of the tool that calculates the footprint, but does it calculate that? The footprint of each employee, if they are working close to the office, far from the office?
Yes. Well, there's in JYROS you can account for the travel from home to work and back, and you can take into account the fact that you have potentially 2 days a week of remote working, and so it's using basically an average of for France of energy consumption from remote working and things like that, and then you also have all your machines. So if you have one that's in the office and one that's used by the employee remote working, obviously you count both. So you have this, and you're taking into account the electricity as well from the office, from the bills. So it's all, yeah, it should be fairly comprehensive on this side.
Okay. Thank you.
That's it. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.